Smash!
Hey, today we're bringing back the old school series with a very special episode. I managed to get my mitts on some original RTB-01 Space Marines from Rogue Trader. Like with the previous episodes of this series, I'm planning on showcasing these miniatures, going through their history, and I'll be painting them up in a style befitting of their era. And you can expect plenty of rambling on the setting itself, as I've become rather enamored with it. But before we get into all that good stuff, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For just $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get access to a weekly Q&A stream, in which I'll showcase your models. And above everything else, it just really helps me out. I'm allowed to do my dream job. Huge thank you to the channel members, you guys are amazing. But dear Crawdad, you got a fully painted army just waiting to be played, but you're a little too scared to bring it anywhere because, let's face it, carrying cases ain't cheap. Well, let me tell you how wrong you are, because this video is sponsored by Tabletop Stronghold, home of some of the very best budget carrying cases on the market. I've been using my Crusader case from Games Workshop for years, but the foam is slowly but surely wearing away. With the mag case, however, you can rest assured that these magnets will last forever. And we'll make sure that your dudes remain pristine, untouched, and will be ready to go anytime you and a friend want to play. And if that's not enough, let's sweeten the deal even further with my discount code, MASH25, to save 25% off your purchase. Hell of a deal if you ask me. Huge thank you to Tabletop Stronghold for sponsoring this video. But enough yammering on the promotional stuff, let's talk about the original Space Marines. I will forever be unapologetic for my love of Space Marines. I know that they're the poster boys, but hey, they're the reason the setting took off as much as it did. But beyond looks, the original Space Marines were kind of a far cry from what we have today, more resembling beat cops, or I guess beat cops. However, when it comes down to it, it's pretty blunt that the presentation of Space Marines really hasn't changed much at all. Well, I do think that they use way too much color for the modern art, but whatever. When it comes to the actual sprues and models, it's very clear that these are progenitors. The build design is almost identical to what we have now. The only broad divergence from sprue design has been Primaris and Horus Heresy Marines. Now, I won't lie, I don't have a full box of these today. I only really have 3. One has been pre-built, and 2 of these are fresh off the sprue. More directly, the Sergeant sprue. Now, without a doubt, these guys are not entirely detailed. It was 1988, what the hell do you expect? At the end of the day, I take this more as a challenge. If you know me, I really do like primitive models with less detail, as I'm allowed to really experiment with my brush. However, even with the build being primitive, I did find that there are some parts that just don't fit in correctly, or at least very well. The torso and the leg pieces really do require a good bit of sanding to actually properly adhere to one another. Even then, it's not a perfect fit, but it's not like it's some nightmare to put together. In fact, I actually just used some Tamiya. Thankfully, the plastic is pretty much the same, so it works just fine. As for the helmets, I will say that the Beakie Marines are pretty decently detailed. Though again, it's pretty safe to say that the way that they fit on these bodies is a little awkward. No longer do we have the nice peg for the helmets to fit into. And now that I think about it, it's really not a very new innovation either. But again, it adds to the charm. And once in a while, I do like a little bit of challenge with building or painting a model. You're allowed to dilly-dally with an old figure, in my opinion. But to really finish this figure off, I decided to arm him with an old-school power glove. Unfortunately, with the bits I have, I didn't have anything for his offhand, but I don't really care all too much. The power glove adds plenty of visual interest. One detail I do find interesting is that the power packs do have the slot for a supposed peg to slide into. However, there's no peg in the back of the Marine's torso for it to slot into, so it's a flat fit. It's a little difficult at first, but it's nothing nightmarish. I did struggle to get the arms attached initially because the pegs on the torso do not slot in nicely. Thicker Tamiya would probably work a lot better than the thin, however, I just used a nice little dollop of super glue. Like I said, kind of a limited set of bits for this to work, but I really like how this first model looks. However, that didn't stop me from building the other figure differently. And I will say these guys are relatively easy to carve up and make your own poses. An unfortunate part of only having one sprue from the box, and especially the Sergeant sprue, is that the other sprues have plenty of options that are meant to be used with the Sergeant. At least what I can gather. But like I said, these bits are easily manipulated and clipped to whatever you want. I decided to take some inspiration from the predecessor Tactical Marines to our modern renditions, and I would clip the handle of the bolt gun, and I would slice off the thumb for the left arm. Using just a little bit of Tamiya allowed for this to glue on, and I would slice down the handle of the bolt gun, and I would attach it to the bottom of the fist. Doing this, it does look a little jank and there's no thumb, but I think it worked out pretty well at the end of the day. Sure, it's primitive, but it's cute, just like you. And I firmly believe that you have absolutely no whimsy if you don't think these guys are at least a little charming. When it comes down to it, it really is a matter of what made Warhammer so special to begin with. By all accounts, Rogue Trader was not a tabletop wargame with competitive rules and stats. It was an RPG system made for telling stories, and as a devout advocate for the concept of your dudes, it doesn't get any better than this. It truly is systems like Rogue Trader and Mordheim and even Necromunda as a modern example that take my enjoyment beyond just painting a pretty miniature. But I'm getting a little off track and in the weeds. By this point, I have 2 fully built models. Although, technically, one of them is already built and I actually painted that one. The other one we'll talk about later. The big thing we gotta choose now is what chapter will we paint these guys as? Oh Jesus. Out of the weeds into the frickin' African bush. Primarily within my Bad Ab War video, check that out if you haven't. I've talked rather extensively on my love for the design, lore, and overall differences between the modern and original chapters of 40k. It's difficult for me to pick a starting point on what I like about these guys, but I'll start with the appreciation that almost all these chapters have made it into the modern era, except for one. Their original representations are very different in a lot of ways, and it may shock you to know that I don't really care for the original Sons of Medusa. But this kind of ties into the next point I want to make, the livery of the Marines themselves. When it comes down to it, it's not that these original chapters have different color schemes from their modern representations. These color schemes aren't really representative of almost anything in the modern setting. One scheme that really stands out to me is the Lamenters because they really haven't changed at all. But that's exactly my point. I think there's very few people that would consider the Lamenters an easy color scheme to pull off. In the setting of Rogue Trader, these guys almost seem like child's play in terms of difficulty. I mean, look at the Minotaurs in this era. Jesus, tap dancing Christ. Someday. But not today. But I'm dilly-dallying. When it comes down to it, I just decided to pick a couple of chapters that I knew I liked from the beginning. The Firehawks. Though I truly do love their modern color scheme, I can't help but think that their original design is far more befitting to their overall identity of being a chapter comprised of dark side fills. I can't help but love that mushroom cloud, and I love painting yellow and flames. However, for the second Marine, I decided to go with my second favorite chapter, the Mantis Warriors, which is also befitting considering these two hate each other's guts. First model I decided to paint was the Firehawk. First thing I did was zenithal prime the model and spray over it using some Imperial Fist. This gives us a nice foundation for the overall color. However, the original Firehawk's yellow is definitely a lot brighter than a typical mustard yellow like the Imperial Fists. So I decided to sponge over top the model using just a little bit of warm yellow from Proacryl. This is a slightly better foundation, and I'm not going to be doing an overall shade on this model. Now, like I mentioned previously, a key detail with these models is they lack a lot of details from what modern Space Marines have. Most notably are the coils between the joints. They're completely flat, resembling more of a fabric of sorts. This obviously isn't the case in the art from what I've seen, but I'll work with it, and I simply just painted over this using some black and highlighting up with some grays. As for toning down the yellow and giving it a little bit more depth, I decided to recess shade the entirety of the yellow using a little bit of Cassandra yellow mixed with a touch of sepia ink. Now, I do think I could have gone a little bit colder with the yellow rather than resembling the Kraft mac and cheese yellow, but I like how this looks, and it is a stark contrast. I don't do it often, but Nuln Oil probably could have worked on this model. One small complaint I do have about these models, however, are the studded pauldrons. They don't really work as well as I'd like them to. Again, this model is almost 40 years old. Now it's time for the flames, and this is where things get very fun. And just a touch stressful. I've painted the original Firehawks scheme, however, painting yellow over an orange color is far less stressful than painting a red color over a yellow. If I mess this up, it's not going to be easy to cover. And for the most part, I did it without any flaws, except for maybe a touch here and there. But I will say, this is not for the faint of heart. But again, let's be real, this scheme is definitely not nearly as stressful as a lot of the other schemes in the Rogue Trader era. Now, even compared to Lamenters, I would say this was not too bad. And I'm really happy with the choice of red. This was Red Baron from Bear Cavalry Paints, and I think this color really stands out on the yellow. Speaking of coming back to the yellow, I decided to begin highlighting this color using a mixture of the warm yellow that we used previously, with a little touch of some Warped Lightning from Army Painter. Looking back, this is actually not too dissimilar from how I painted the Rogue Trader Tin Boy. Now, I did give a couple of cons for painting this model, but I will say, as a big pro, it's quite easy to highlight. One of the best things about this is, even though it doesn't have a ton of detail, the blockiness does lend itself well for showing you directly where to highlight. Sure, there's some really bad cons with the lack of detail, but when it comes to the base colors on the main portion of the power armor, it's kind of a breeze. Hell, it'd be cool to see these guys back in print, not only just for the nostalgia, but also it'd just be really good for newer painters. But I did pick the Firehawks, and I don't exactly have a decal for their old symbol, so we gotta do it by hand. And I gotta say, it's not my best work in terms of freehand, but I definitely tried, and it could be a lot worse. Another example of painting over yellow and not really having much to work off of. At least with the Lamenters, I could just paint the whole thing black and then paint the white over. If this is messed up in any way, I gotta paint over yellow. And I did mess this up quite a few times on the red. But overall, I like the mushroom cloud look. The really big thing that I gotta do is make sure that I actually make it look as if there's a different layer between the clouds. And it's not that hard to blend grays and blacks and whites. Biggest key factor you gotta remember when painting, and especially for freehanding, is patience. And again, this is an old school model. We don't have the huge stress of painting an army, we can focus on this singular dude. Sort of. I do have to get this video out, so whatever. Eventually, I would be finished with the mushroom cloud, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out overall. I can't complain too much. There's definitely some places I wish it looked a little bit better, and the limited amount of room from the flames really kind of pushed me into a corner. But hey, it still looks like a mushroom cloud. That's all that matters. With that challenge done, I was then left with another in the form of the eyes of the Firehawks. They're different from just about every chapter in Rogue Trader. They don't necessarily have black lenses, but they don't have white lenses. The chapters with black lenses are clear as day, however these guys have a little bit more of a glint. So I opted to switch this out for a bit of a middle ground. Not necessarily resembling a buggy black lens, but more or less a ghostly look. And though it was kind of a pain in the ass to paint these concave eyes, I think it turned out pretty well. And truly, would the model really be finished if he didn't have the old school Rogue Trader graffiti all over the armor? There's a great sense of individuality that I like a lot between the Marines and Rogue Trader. And honestly, I almost went a little tame with this one. There's a lot of different designs, and I do like how liberal the checker pattern usage is. But we got other figures I gotta paint anyway, so that's pretty much where I left it with the extra details. Last thing I really had to do to finish off this model was use a little bit of Warped Lightning on the highlights, and finishing those highlights just a touch of Ushabti bone. And of course, I did base the model in an old school style scheme, goblin green and all. Overall, I gotta say, even though there were some minor setbacks, this was a very fun model to paint. I have plenty of experience painting yellow, so it's not that big of a deal for me, but the eyes and the symbol were definitely a challenge. And truthfully, even though I do have a couple of other models, I really want more of these guys. Their size and lack of details make them a treat to paint. You can also say the lack of detail makes them a bit of a thorn in the ass to paint, but I find the good outweighs the bad far more in this aspect. However, we do have a second model, and this one was actually pre-built. As for our Mantis Warrior, this figure was definitely teetering between the line between being old school and new school. Essentially what I ended up doing was spraying the entire model using a little bit of green from Pro-Acryl and a little bit of light green from Vallejo. A big reason, again, why I chose the Mantis Warriors is, well, I like them a lot, but I also have old school decals for them. I really like how it was starting out, but I decided to experiment a little bit with something that I've used pretty recently. I've been using AK Interactive's enamel washes, and I thought it would be kind of interesting to go over the model using some of the dark brown wash. There's a rather large project I've been using this on that I've had good results with, but I don't know if this is really the go with an older model like this. This is essentially the same as using AK Interactive streaking grime. Now, some of you might be turning your nose up at this, and I don't blame you. But in my opinion, I quite like how this looks. I will be the first to admit this is a very unorthodox method to use on an old model like this. And as a plus side for those that don't really care for how this looks, hey, you don't have to experiment on your own models. I did it for you. Now for another element for the Mantis Warrior once the overall shade was dried, was to add in the freehand on the helmet. One thing I actually neglected to film with the Firehawk was the classic red stripe. I managed to make sure I got this portion on film for the Mantis Warrior, as this is a huge part of their original design. Even though I didn't get the hexagon shape 100% perfect, I'm still quite happy with how it turned out, especially the yellow. I am also kind of happy I did this after the wash, because I didn't really want to blend it all too much with the green, and because I didn't do a fully opaque finish, it just looks like a little bit of wear and tear. Once I was happy with how it turned out, I began highlighting the green using a mixture of the green and the light green with a little bit of off-white. I do appreciate the John Deere look when it comes to the Mantis Warriors. However, the green I used is probably a little bit more vibrant than it needs to be, but I just like how it looks. And I like the juxtaposition of the vibrant colors with the streaking grime. I guess it's not streaking grime, but you get what I mean. At this point between the highlighting, I would also add in the little Mantis Warrior teeth, which is a great detail. Another reason why we need more Beakie helmets. So many extra details we can freehand on these things. As for the lenses of the model, I did decide to go for the vibrant red-orange. Well, I could have sworn these guys had black lenses. I must have been thinking of Sons of Medusa. And maybe it was just painting black lenses on the Beakies. I found the red lenses to be far less of a challenge. The base tone of burnt red and some fiery orange, it's pretty simple and it looks great. Oh man, does it contrast with that green. Though my little experiment may be off-putting to some, I'm still happy that I did it. I think it was kind of an interesting way of going about it, and maybe I should go even further with it. Honestly, it would be kind of fun to paint one of these guys similarly to how I paint my really detailed modern Space Marines. Tons of armor chipping, over-the-top details. But that'll have to wait for another day. All in all, these figures are an absolute blast, and I'm really happy I got to work with them. Might be a long time before I get my mitts on more of them, but what can I say? I enjoyed the ones I had, and it just makes me want to paint even more Rogue Trader stuff. Speaking of which, still got the third model, but I've mentioned this before, but I'm gonna tease it again. I do have a rather large Space Marine Rogue Trader era Kitbashing coming. Not gonna set a date, but I have a lot of very interesting kitbashes and special units tailored exclusively to the Rogue Trader era. So keep your little eyeballs peeled for that. But I've definitely been flapping my beak enough for one video. So like always, if you enjoyed this one, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kitbash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.